Welcome to Conversations for Our Time, podcast number 8 with the Quiet Sun team, myself, George and John. In today's podcast, we're going to be discussing how we've made a 21-day hot compost heap using a method that is recommended by Dr. Elaine, Ingham and Matt Powers. Different ways to inoculate the compost to give it life, because compost really is so important, probably the most important thing we can do whilst growing our own food. And also we'll be talking about our current Sow and Grow Revolution project, which has been launched as a crowdfunding that will enable us to bring back a localised food network in Essex by regenerating the land. As we see the cost of living go up with energy and food prices increasing, we will discuss in detail the solutions for this. How you doing, John?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks, George. How about yourself?
I'm good, mate. I'm excited as usual to do this next podcast. It's a really good topic, I feel, and really important. So I'll go straight into it. We've been researching Dr. Elaine Ingham and Matt Powers for quite a while now, practicing those methods, and others like Jeff Lawton and Chris Trump, which we'll talk about as well. So let's dive in deep with the composting, explaining the method in detail. The basic tools that we use and the materials are needed are just things like pitchforks, a 2mm galvanised steel, stakes to hold it in place, a temperature gauge, and the materials that we will need is browns, greens and manure. So those are just the basics, but we've done it and it works really, really well. We were amazed at the results. So yeah, what was your thoughts on that when we made that, John?
Yeah, it was an interesting experience. I think personally, when we actually, before we just the creation of it itself, it was just exciting, man. I loved every moment of it. Very labour intensive. However, it is worth it because theoretically, as long as you follow the principles, which is why it's labour intensive and time consuming, because you have to kind of be there every day, really, measuring temperature, moisture. It is a process of learning, just like everything is, but it's the same as growing food. You know, you just have to, I think the important thing is not to get too carried away with making it perfect. It's more about learning, you know, what's going to determine how good the compost comes out. So when you have the gassing off and things like that, you need to understand why piles of organic matter gas off. And that is a learning experience itself, because it makes you want to learn more. But yeah, I mean, you, me and Joe did it together and it was cool, man. Great experience.
So explain, just go in a bit more detail of the process from beginning to the end, really.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so the process basically is you need to collect 3 different types of materials. So you want a carbon source, a nitrogen source and manure. Carbon and nitrogen denoted by green and browns. So the browns bring the carbon, the nitrogen is the greens. So you can source these from various different places, and there's even a calculator that you can use. Or if you just go onto the internet and just look at what different types of materials will provide for your carbon and your nitrogen. For your nitrogen, you've got grass, weeds. You have to get these green products before they go to seed, because what happens is as grass and weeds grow, a lot of the nutrients that go into them is nitrogen to help them to grow. And then when they seed, what happens is they actually lose the nitrogen and it just goes, you just have carbon left because it doesn't need to grow anymore, right? So that whole idea of the nitrogen just doesn't need for the weed or the grass. So that's how you determine it. So you get them before they seed. That's your greens. You can get them from seaweed, and there's lots of different nitrogen sources. That would be for your nitrogen. So you need 1/3 of your compost heap will be your 33.3% will be your nitrogen. Your carbon will be 33.3%. And carbon is things like hay, wood chips, even straw, although it's really high in carbon, cardboard, That's anything that's after a plant has gone through its process of growth, fruiting, and if it's an annual, it's then done with its life. So it will just die. Probably the best easily sourced carbon material is hay. And the reason for this is because we grow it in abundance. So you can get meadow hay, and there's all sorts of different alfalfa hay, and they will all, or oat hay, and they all contain different values of carbon. So this is the next bit. Obviously you have your manure as well. So that will be at 33.3%. So when you actually come to working out for your compost, this is where it gets a little bit more complicated. The ideal carbon to nitrogen ratio for a good balanced compost is 24:1. So it's 24 carbon and 1 nitrogen. So depending on your carbon source, you might need to adjust the amount of nitrogen you put in there. But you can put more nitrogen in by adding things like urine, like human urine.
As gross as it sounds, but
it's not gross. It's on tap, man. I mean, look, at the end of the day, there's nothing gross about anything apart from these lies that have been made up.
Oh, totally.
There's nothing wrong. Great guy who wrote a really amazing book, which is called The New Complete Book of Self-Sufficiency, wrote a poem about human manure, about composting your own poo, shit, whatever you want to call it, and the sadness of actually how we treat our waste. And we pump it out. I mean, I know some of it goes through a process, but a lot of it just goes into rivers and oceans, even though we're told they don't. Right? So he just talked about this really weird paradox of the fact that we think we should just flush it away, and yet for thousands of years we've been using it. And if you go to the Edo period in Japan, they pay people for their excrement.
Absolutely.
And if you look at nature, that waste is what makes up our soil. That's basically what creates biology in the soil. And also, to a degree, when the microorganisms start getting in there, you're going to have this as well in your compost if you get it right. So that's really important to kind of understand, as just a bit of a side note. And really the carbon, when you're measuring these things, you need to be quite precise. And there's a calculator you can use online which allows you to kind of work out, and even for things like moisture, etc. So when you if you want to do this and you purchase hay, you should really ask, what is the moisture content of it? Because depending on what the moisture content is going to also affect it as well. So you need to do this for your weeds as well, or your greens, grass. I mean, we were using grass, but also weeds, and part of this as well is for the diversity, because you also think of all the different other minerals and elements you're getting in from those weeds. So you can be getting potassium, iron, you can get all sorts of stuff from a diversity. So the other thing about the greens is if you can make them as diverse as possible, this also adds to the bioavailability for the microorganisms to be abundant in your compost.
Exactly, yeah.
So that's basically what you need to know before you start. And then there's a method which has been developed by Dr. Elaine Ingham, which is also supported by Matt Powers, two leading figures in pioneering the understanding of soil and how we grow food in it. And theirs is done through a layered process. So you start off with your browns, your hay, then you go to your nitrogen, then you go to manure, and then you keep layering it.
Layered up.
Keep layering it up and up and up. We did the method where you build a cage, a circular cage, around an area. It has to be at least 1 metre squared. I mean, all you need to do is just put a metre, measure a metre and just in diameter and just work off that. And that's how you layer it. And then you want to water it every third layer, and you just keep building it up and up. I mean, it takes a couple of hours to do. It's amazing how long it actually takes, but it's worth it, because You know, at the end of the day, there's nothing more important we need to do right now is to regenerating the soil, and the way you do that is through making compost from natural products that haven't been tainted by pesticides and things like this.
So we need the cage though as well, because it will lean.
Yes, yeah, well, yeah, exactly. Unless you do it in a pyramid pile, you can do something like that but it's easier in a way because you're following a process, and therefore you know that you've got less chance of messing it up, basically. So you do this, and you want it works out to be about 1.5 meters high, and then at the end of the process you water it until you can see a puddle come out of the bottom of the pile at the lowest point of the ground. That's the basic process. Yeah. Also, sorry, I did forget, when you get halfway up, you want to put in, best thing to do is use urine. So maybe like 1 to 2 litres of urine. And what that does is that just starts the combustion of the process that you need in order to get that pile up to the temperature that you need to initiate the reaction of the microorganisms that you want.
So you've got to check the temperature. Just explain how often you check the temperature. We're just keeping an eye on it, really, make sure.
Well, you need to really check it every day, because there's a lot of different. There's different elements involved in, if a compost heap where we are, how long that takes, and how long chain reaction takes. To somewhere with different humidity, different moisture in the air, different temperature, all that kind of stuff.
To check it every day.
And the idea is you want to increase the temperature to between within the first day or so, you want to get that temperature in the middle of the pile up to between 55 and 65 degrees. Once you get it up to that, you then want to keep it at a constant for around 2 or 3 days. And after those 2 or 3 days, you then want to turn it. And the reason you want to turn it is to stop the middle of the pile getting too hot. But the outside of the pile, you need to put that in the middle of the pile, and the middle of the pile and the outside of the pile, so the heat is evenly distributed. And also what you don't want to do is allow that to get too hot, because if you do, you kill off the thermophilic bacteria, which is what is decomposing that compost. So because you get it up so high, these microorganisms are really efficient at eating your organic matter. And what you'll find is within the first 3 days, most of the greens would have just been decomposed. But partly because they're letting off nitrogen, but also this is obviously the easiest to decompose.
It does get really hot. It was really impressive, wasn't it?
It gets really, it's steaming in the middle of the pile.
So how often do you turn it? Just explain.
So you want to turn it, do your initial making of the compost, then you turn it after 4th day. There is room to play with this, depending on what the temperature is. And when you turn it, as I said, you put the outside and the inside and the inside and the outside. Before you turn it, you want to check the temperature. Also, you want to check the moisture. So you want to ensure it's about 60% moisture. And the way you can tell this is by picking a big handful, squeezing it together. And if a little drip comes out, you know you're in the right kind of goal.
So just to be clear, once you've turned it after the 3rd, 4th day as well, you just turn it again every other day, roughly.
Every other day, roughly. Yeah. But depending on the temperature. You might have to do it, more or less.
You just learn as you go,
You just learn as you go, but you do, it is, the labour intensiveness is 1 turn in the pile, which even with 3 of you, it still takes a good half hour, 40 minutes maybe.
Just explain about the potential problems that can occur and what people can do.
You can have too much gassing off. of the nitrogen-based materials, which means that you're losing nitrogen, which you don't want to do. You want to keep it in there. That's why this process has been developed, which allows you to control those elements. The other thing is that it may take too long, but all these can be played with by just adjusting things. That's really, it's all a learning experience, because as I said, what works for us won't necessarily work for someone in a different part of the country.
Well, the whole environment makes a big difference, and what we also recommend is testing the soil as well in a lab.
Yeah, so there's general tests you can do. Really, this is in my mind how you should do it, is because through the experience of doing it, as you turn it the first time, you turn it the second time, you'll notice a difference in the smell of it, the look of it, the feel of it. As you go through that process, what you don't want is a little bit of an ammonia smell is okay, but too much, you know that you've basically killed most of the things in there. But a little bit is fine. Then you get to the point where it starts to smell like a forest floor. I hope everyone that's listening to this has smelled a forest floor. If they haven't, go and find your nearest forest and smell it. That's the smell you want. And the colour you want is not that, you don't want it completely black. You want it dark, but with a bit of colour to it. So this is really important. The way we use our senses are actually essential, because before the advent of the microscope and testing for all these things, people didn't have this. It was just based on. And the second thing you want to do is plant a seed in it and compare it to compost, organic compost. Say you buy organic good compost from the shop and compare it to that.
Absolutely.
Then maybe compare it to potting compost or vermicompost. Vermicompost is really good for growing, germinating seeds.
Well,
and that's another test. So that is another test. But really, the best way to do this is either learn what you need to look for in a microscope and purchase a microscope. Find someone that may be able to do that, because what you're looking for are things like protozoa, nematodes, microarthropods, fungi strands, bacteria, these different things. But the more life you see, the better the compost.
And what we'll do is we'll stick some, obviously as I usually do, is put some videos and links so people can have a look. So that's what we're doing at the moment, the Quiet Sun team. We also started to inoculating the compost with biochar. As I say, it's all trial and error. We did have some problems with this, but none of these techniques are wasted. It's a learning process. I am proud of the fact that we're actually going out there and doing these things. So first we built a kiln. We've never done it before, so it's good practice. But we did get some problems with that. So instead, we watched another video. This one was from the Weedy Garden. I'll put a link for that one. Basically, you get a 44-gallon drum, and Giuliano basically cut the side out and made a hole at the bottom. So we gave it a crack. But walk us through that, John, and explain the interesting facts about biochar. I mean, it's the nuts, isn't it? It really is.
It is they're still looking at the efficacy of it, but there's no doubt it's a very useful amendment for soil. And biochar is the process of burning a woody material. Doesn't really matter what type of wood it is. I mean, different types of wood will produce different types of biochar. That's for people to discover themselves. But it can't be laminated or varnished, because you don't want that stuff there. And biochar is basically the stage in the process that is after charcoal, because charcoal still has resin in it, which is why it can burn again, before it gets to ash. And this process is basically called pyrolysis, and this is where you burn the wood with a very small or little to no oxygen. You can have oxygen obviously at the top, but underneath you're meant to control the amount of oxygen it has. And as it burns, it produces loads and loads of tiny little micropores in the structure of the wood. Yeah. And then you quench it. So once you know it's in that stage, you quench it before it goes to ash. Because if you leave it for like 5 minutes longer, it will just turn grey and go to ash. And then you quench it by pouring water on it, obviously. What that actually does as well is opens up those micropores. So that thing then, so instead of that, you say like you've got a square inch of biochar. The idea of that is that the surface area of it is then multiplied by like 1,000, perhaps more. And people might have heard of activated charcoal. It's a similar thing.
Yeah, we used to eat activated charcoal.
Yeah,
it's good for the body.
I've got some in the cupboard. So what that does is 2 to 3 things really. The first is it increases that biochar for its mass has 3 times the amount of water holding capacity to soil. So that's the first thing. So the reason that's important is because, one, it can prevent flooding because it sucks the water up. So it prevents waterlogging of growing, yeah? But also it prevents drought because it captures the water when it does rain and then it just lets it out into the soil when the soil gets dry. It's beautiful.
Absolutely. I mean, with the biochar, you can put it actually, some people do it differently. You can put it whilst you're turning the compost and in that process, or you can put it in at the end
It's got one other thing there, which is the most important. Well, it's 2 other things. The second is it has the capacity.
Oh yes, absolutely.
Yeah, to house loads and loads and loads of microorganisms.
Yeah, absolutely.
So your protozoa, your nematodes, etc. The third is that it allows the exchange of electrons to be speeded up by 3 times the amount that you would do in soil. And the reason this is important, I don't know whether people are aware of this, but everything's connected electrically. And when you've got electrons, it's like citation exchange capacity, right? And it's the ability for these electrons to be exchanged between the living things in the soil, all the biology. So biochar is an amazing product, and it's kind of based on a thing called terra preta, which is what they found in the Amazon, and people can obviously look at that as well. And that's a fascinating kind of story of where that come from. So yeah, biochar has a lot of capabilities and a lot of applications, and it's something that we will be using in our process of making the compost for Sow and Grow Revolution. And
another way to inoculate the compost is by using EM1, which stands for effective microorganism. Now, there are different ways. People might have different methods, and it can get confusing, but I watched a video and it explained it really well for me. I'll put a link for that. So EM1 is the base product that every other thing comes from. There is the Bakashi brand that's made from EM1, but this video explained it really well for me. I thought it was really, really good. But the basics, EM1 is a combination of different types of microgroups, bacteria and fungus that work symbiotically. So basic microgroups are in it, which, as I understand it, they're not activated yet, so you can't use it straight away. It's got to go through the process by mixing it with molasses, and we've done that, haven't we, John? So walk us through that.
Yeah, I mean, it's not something it's something that Giuliano did, because we've all been doing kind of different things.
Yeah.
But I'd just like to kind of say, effective microbes are great. The only issue that you have with it is how effective are they going to be? in your bioregion, because really the best way to get microbes is locally. However, it's still a great product because it's still going to provide a lot of benefit for your soil. It's just it's not going to be completely symbiotic. These things are really intelligent in their individual ways because they've been around for billions of years and therefore they know exactly what they're doing. You know, they're part of the soil formation. So it is a great product, and Giuliano mixed it with molasses. You take it through an aeration process basically. So you want to take it through an aeration process of about 24 to 48 hours. It depends on the temperature and all these variables, right? You know, this is part of what these things are about is, you know, I actually wrote an article called We Are All Scientists. And what the point I was trying to get at with this article is that we will have the capabilities to do this, especially when you do it, because it makes us, you know, into better human beings, because we, in the pursuit of trying to understand the truth, nature is the best teacher. It always has been,
Absolutely
it always
agree.
will be. And when we just shut off our egos and we just, you know, surrender to the fact that we don't really know anything, we can learn amazing things. So you mix it with these molasses, and you then, like most of these products that you make, you then water it down. So you dilute it before you add it to stuff. So we actually, this second batch of compost we made, Joe made the one with the molasses, and we then just kind of sprayed it onto the compost pile. And the greatest thing about these is obviously the microbes. When you introduce the microbes into a compost pile, you can then do EM compost piles. So the idea of this is these bacteria or these microbes, what they're doing is they're helping to digest the material. Certainly from what Matt Powers says is that the EM actually really helps in the process of it, and it allows you to potentially not turn it as much. So it's a little bit of an easier way to make compost, but then, you know, these things are still in kind of discovery.
It's worth trying out there. That's why I put it out there if people want to try it. Another thing, a video I watched was on Bakashi Composting, which you mentioned to me a while ago, so I looked into it. You just get a bucket and crumple some paper up and put it in the bucket. This is the video that I saw anyway. And you put the Bakashi brand in, then you put your food scraps in, then you put some more Bakashi brand in, and then you put like a plastic bag on top, and then put the lid back on it. So that's it. You just keep adding the food scraps and a bit more of the Bakashi brand each time you add in the food scraps, pushing it down and keep layering it up basically. And then you close it for 2 weeks so it ferments, and then after the 2 weeks you'll see the mycelium growing. Then you just dump it on the compost heap to start its next phase of aerobic decomposition. So when you let it finish decomposing, and then you cover up a little bit with garden soil. I think that's a great idea for people to practice with. What do you think of Bakashi
again,
composting?
I don't really have much experience. I mean, I've looked into it a little bit.
Yeah.
You know, Bakashi really comes from like the whole Korean natural farming. It's kind of an offshoot of that. But the idea of Bakashi and other such applications is taking it through the aerobic kind of process. That fermentation allows for, if done in the right way, allows for a more fungal dominant product at the end of it. Whereas the hot composting, because you're introducing air to it all the time, it is a slightly different outcome at the end. But they both, you know, like the hot composting, after you've done that, you allow it to just sit there, right? And that's actually when the fungi come in. So in a way, like the whole Bakashi thing is kind of doing it the opposite way.
Yeah, I get it.
But these things have been done for years. So they are, as long as you follow the process.
Yeah.
you're
This is
all
the
right.
trouble. People might divert and start doing their own thing a little bit with the process, and they wonder why it doesn't work. You have to stick with it.
I think also the really important thing is it's like going back to human yarn. You cannot decompose human shit in a safe way if you feed yourself shit. So if you eat processed foods and foods that aren't organic or you grow yourself, that would be better. Pesticides pass through us, and therefore you're not taking them out. And this is something we realised with the composting is you can't have chemicals in there because we picked some seaweed the other day, but there's potential heavy metals in there. We don't want that.
We don't want that.
So these things are possible, but you have to do them properly. And like you're doing a science experiment, you have to think of all the variables and just ensure that, because really what this is about, the reason I'm doing this is because unless we understand natural cycles and we realise that we are part of this, we are stewards of taking care of this. And certainly my purpose, I believe, in life is to keep connecting with this as much as I can. And it's all about learning. We're all on a path, right? And really this is what the important thing is. Even just digging in the soil will connect you to things, and you'll then start to realise that the way we live is very unnatural, and this is the cause of many of the chronic physical issues that we experience in society, and certainly the mental ones, the psychological ones, are because people don't know who they are. And I'm not out of that either. I struggle all the time with the insanity of the world, even if it wasn't what we had going on at the moment. The important thing is how many people are really happy? If you took everything away from them, would they still be happy? We don't know what's around the corner. And actually, just learning about these things, I don't know about you, George, but it is so bloody empowering.
It is, to do it ourselves, and this is exactly what I was going to say. Yeah, to do it ourselves is taking back the power. There's always a danger of someone else providing you toothpaste, someone else providing you food, someone else providing you the water, especially government, They don't believe us. The general society doesn't believe us that it's all poison. You go to the supermarket and all it is chemicals. But people don't want to look into it and these things. And I want to take it back into my own hands.
I think the issue with that is we can't trust big business. We just can't, because even if you didn't have a group of people that were trying to mess with everyone else, even if that wasn't true, why do we trust anyone? Or why do we give away our power? It's not about, because I don't, I'm sure most people don't trust politicians, but they still give their power away to them. And the only reason for that is because they've been disempowered. And this isn't an attack on or judgment on anyone, but it's just my perspective. But I believe that as we walk further and further away from our connection to nature, how do we know what reality is? All these atrocities that happen around the world are down to big business. But also, if we didn't invest in big business, most of these things wouldn't be happening. Of course, convenience is great, but what's more important? Convenience? Do you want to be high or do you want to be free? Because it's great going through these motions and oh yeah, look at this, I've got this, and wow, yeah. But are you free? Because if we have to rely on these things, how can we really be happy? None of it. Are people happy inside, or they just... It's like, I like to use the analogy of Facebook. Most people are just posting good stuff. Oh, look at me, look at this picture, look at that. They don't talk about what's really on their mind, what they worry about, all this stuff. This connection is so important, George. And I think if everyone just gave it a chance, they would see the benefits of it. And then they would realise that actually the best way to create happy, healthy communities is for them to be localised, because then you know everyone and you can trust everyone. Everything, all the deals you do are done by handshake, because you don't need anything else. You don't even need money.
This is how they did it in the olden days, and this is why we enjoy doing it ourselves, and hopefully we can bring back some form of localised network. But also what we've been doing is researching a lot of Chris Trump's work, and you love this, didn't you, John? This is natural Korean farming. It's just brilliant, isn't it? So when we grow food, I mean, the whole point of growing is not just to feed ourselves, but it's to do it in the best way possible. Healthy soil, healthy roots, healthy plants and food, but being as disease resistant as possible, and doing it just like nature does out in the wild. So today people are really understanding more about the microbial world, and they can test it in the lab, and we now know more about how they use a process or a technique called shotgun metagenomics, where people can now really study the massive diversity in nature, studying the genes in all microorganisms and seeing how it all works. It's just absolutely amazing. But once we understand it ourselves and what the process is, we can do it ourselves once we understand why we're doing it, because why we're doing it is also important to know. What we're doing and how everything works together, and understanding the soil food web. So John, talk us through exactly what natural Korean farming is, what indigenous microorganisms are, and the different stages of it all, like IMO 1, IMO 2, 3, 4 and 5, the problems that can occur and the solutions for them.
So, Korean natural farming, I mean, I've been probably researching it for 3 or 4 months. And originally founded by, I mean, this guy didn't really, he just brought it to the public.
Yeah,
but remember, these methods of doing stuff have been around for millennia. And these people are just pioneers in our modern era. So Dr. Cho Han-kyu was the proponent of Korean natural farming, or probably better referred to as global natural farming, because this can be applied, this is just where it's kind of come from, but it can be applied to any region, any country, and pretty much every climate as well. Maybe limited to Antarctica, but there's so much scope for this. It's a brilliant addition to regenerative agriculture. All these things that we talk about form, under the umbrella of regenerative agriculture. So, founded in the kind of the 60s in South Korea, and he lectured all over South Korea, teaching farmers how to grow amazing, healthy crops and produce really good yields as well. And this is important. And this was actually in the birth of pesticides were starting to be used quite heavily around the world. So there was actually a lot of personal battles that he went through in order to kind of bring this to the world. He died recently. He's got a son that carries on his work, and he's just a really cool, great guy. Not that I know him personally, but he's just given his life to trying to give people simple solutions to, and really interesting ones, to give their plants a healthy start and a healthy life, so they can produce healthy food and offspring, etc. So there's so many different things that can come from Korean natural farming, but we'll talk about the IMO. I mean, we have made lots of different amendments. So we've made fermented fruit juice, water-soluble calcium. We also did, fermented plant juice. Well, we're going to do that actually. And there's a couple of other ones like oriental herbal nutrient, lactic acid bacteria, water-soluble potassium, low S powder. And they're all things that you can be created yourself. So amazing. But the most important of all of these is IMO. And we talked about EM before, effective microorganisms. Well, IMO is Indigenous Microorganisms. Essentially, in all this is where permaculture kind of has a view on this as well, is that to grow food in the most healthy, natural way, the best thing to do is replicate a natural ecosystem. With the idea of indigenous microorganisms, what we do is we go to a established ecosystem, a forest, or it could be a paddy field, depends on where you are in the world, but where a lot of life grows, where it's been undisturbed for as long a time as possible. You collect the microorganisms from the forest, basically, from the forest floor. And the way you do this is you cook some rice up, you put it in a wooden container, you cover it over with porous paper, and then you go and plant it, ideally next to a tree if you've got some woods around you, and you leave it there for between 4 and 7 days, depending on temperature, moisture, etc. And during that time, what happens is that the microorganisms from the forest floor will be attracted to the cooked rice, to the moisture, and they'll attach themselves to it. When you go back there and you uncover it, you'll see potentially different colours, but what you're looking for is a white kind of spidery web material. Hypha. So mycelium, essentially. Then, as quickly as you possibly can, you take it back and you mix it with brown sugar, demerara sugar, organic, if you can.
It worked really well, didn't it?
It did work well. And you mix it like for like. So a kilogram of the rice would be a kilogram of sugar. And you mix it up, and that basically what that does is that forms the process, or it stops the process, the microorganisms die, and it puts them into like a latent state. That's IMO 2. So to make IMO 3, you take your sugar and your microorganisms. You want to expand the amount of mycelium that's in there, or the organisms. So what you then do is you get wheat bran, rice bran, or anything else that's got a high carbohydrate, because that's what you're looking for. That's what the microorganisms are looking for, just like they did in the rice. Yeah, you expand those. With that, you want to mix different Korean farming applications. So like your fermented plant juice, your WCA, you can add things like humic acid, seawater. There's lots of different things, and what this does is people have experienced over time that this allows the process to happen on a greater level. So you mix a small amount, a tablespoon maybe, of the IMO 2 in water with these other amendments. The water has to be dechlorinated. So if you don't have access to a really good filter like a Berkey, best thing to do is put water in a bucket and let it gas off over 24 hours. Most of the crap should be gone. And that's kind of, you leave it there for 7 days once you've mixed it all in, and cover it with straw mats, and that produces your IMO 3. And you can again do this. You can collect these things from different parts, so it doesn't have to be a forest. I think that's really important just to note, because not everyone has a forest. But you want to go to an undisturbed area, because microorganisms are really sensitive, and sometimes it can take them years to get back to an area once they've been disturbed. So I think like that is the other important thing. So IMO 4, this is really when you start to apply it to, or you get into a state where you're going to apply it to your vegetables or your trees or whatever you want to use it on. So you have, just as a kind of an idea, you would use 10 kilos of IMO 3. So that's your rice bran or your wheat bran mixed with the IMO 2 and the other amendments. Then you want 5 kilos of field soil and 5 kilos of fine red soil. So that's really kind of the ingredients in there. You're kind of doing exactly the same thing as you did with the IMO 3. You're mixing it up. Again, like the compost, all these things are about moisture, heat, etc. You can control the moisture with your inputs. So you can add more of these inputs, so the FPJ, the FFJ, there's all sorts of different ones. And then you keep the moisture at about 65 to 70%. You can also add seawater for controlling that moisture. And again, it's it's really similar to like the process of compost. Is you're just growing organisms. That's essentially what you're trying to do.
Yeah, exactly.
And then basically after a few days you'll end up with your finished product. IMO 5 I actually haven't really researched, so Chris Trump has got a video on that, I think. So if people want to watch that.
I'll put all the relevant links there.
Again, these things are, so, Chris Trump, for his fermented plant juice, he uses banana flowers. We don't have that. For fermented fruit juice, he uses bananas. He also suggests don't use bananas unless you've grown them yourself or you know where they're coming from. Because if they had pesticides sprayed on them, you're just defeating the object. Well, yeah, so we used apples for our fermented fruit juice.
She picked it from the orchard.
Yeah. And it's the same with, the eggshells, they're organic eggshells we use to make the WCA. And when we do fermented plant juice, I'm thinking we're going to use lamb's quarter because that's got so much amazing nutrients in it.
Oh, yeah.
So again, we're experimenting and it's really coming out well. I mean, I'm surprised at how well it's working. It's taken a few little goes at it, but
at some point, because of what we've done, I've filmed them. I've made videos of these, and I will edit them and we'll put them up at some point so people can see what we're doing. But this is easily researchable anyway, and I'll put the link of Chris Trump anyway. But that's the general process, and it's doing really, really well. We're proud of the fact.
Impressed, man. It's good going.
There's lots of other different things as well we can do. I mean, another way of making a great fertiliser is vermicomposting, which is the Quiet Sun team are a big fan of this. I liked watching Jeff Lawton's video on it. So you just get like your food scraps and recycle yourself, and you create you're essentially creating your own food system. So you can make liquid or solid fertiliser. It's very simple. You get a bathtub, a piece of old chicken wire, a scrap piece of shade cloth. You use the shade cloth to wrap up the chicken wire for strength. Then you fold it up and use it as a filter so it doesn't get clogged up. So you put it over the drain hole and then you put a brick on top of it. That's simple enough. And then you put the manure down as the base. You fill up half the tub. Then you put your worms in. Not earthworms, but your red wrigglers, brandlings, tiger worms, Indian night crawlers, African night crawlers, Indian blues, that sort of thing. And then half decomposed food scraps, not fresh ones because it will go airless. So, and then you just water it up, put some sort of shade cloth over the tub because I don't really like too much light. And then in 3 months you got great compost, and you have a bucket as well for the liquid fermented worm juice. But we did it a slightly different way, but this is how Jeff Lawton does it. But it's a simple process, a simple system, and we're quite a fan of vermicomposting, aren't we?
Yeah, definitely. I started this I bought some worms maybe a year ago actually. I tried 2 different ways. I did it in a butler sink to begin with. Then I built a kind of mini worm house, and it works really well. Now we're doing it in a bathtub because we're going to be able to produce more. But they are amazing animals. I mean, the greatest thing is you can apply them in lots of different ways. If you make compost and feed it to your worms, they love it. And they'll make that compost that's already good even better. Again, it always comes back to looking back. Well, how does nature do it? It's a great process, and it's something that most people can do. It's probably the easiest way to compost, and you can pretty much, apart from meat, eggs, some citrus fruit, there's a couple of other things like the onion family, although it's debatable. They will eat literally everything, but you need to make sure that the more you chop it up, the easier it is for them to digest. And it still does require a little bit of care, and attention, but it is probably the easiest way to start composting. And if you've got kids, it's cool, because I loved worms when I was a kid, and they're just fascinating creatures. So, yeah.
Right, let's talk about the compost tea. It's a great fertiliser. I'll just explain the basics, and then you can go into a bit more in how we're going to be doing it. But it's fast. It will provide a lot of beneficial bacteria and microbes for the soil. It provides the plants active nutrients, and it helps with plant growth. So I'm a fan of compost tea. You can make compost tea very quickly, and it's really simple. Drop the compost in the bucket, just let it steep. But you really want to brew tea, really, not only for the nutrients, but it's for the microbes and the fungi. You can steep it if you want to. If it's your first time, go ahead. But it's best to brew it. Then you can use like a bubbler for aeration, or just use a stick to help the beneficial bacteria there. So give it a good stir. Let it sit though for about 24 to 48 hours to let the chlorine evaporate out. Then you just water your plants. You can add things to it as well if you want as well. So compost tea, John, that's a good one, isn't it?
Yeah, so the compost that you use is really important. There's no point using compost that's got loads of pathogens in it to make compost tea, or using compost that doesn't have beneficial bacteria and fungi in it to make the tea. So that's obviously a no-brainer. And really the application in regards to you dilute this depending on what stage of the process of the plant is at that you're spraying it on. You can obviously add other things to it as well. I mean, you could do vermicompost tea. You can add molasses and all sorts of different things that will be applicable depending on what you're adding it to. If you're adding it to perennials, trees, etc., you want a fungally dominant compost tea. If you're adding it to your annuals, you want something that's kind of maybe between 7 and 6.5 on the pH scale. And if you're growing anything like brassicas, then you want it a little bit above 7. So it just depends on how you want to apply it and what you're using it for, and also what kind of state your land is in. What's been grown there before, if you had pesticides, all these different things are really important. But again, it's
another good option.
It's another good option that takes a little bit of time, but requires a very small amount of power. Just aerate a bucket, a 20-litre bucket. It doesn't take long.
Yeah, exactly.
24 hours, 48 hours. It's just another brilliant creation from a group of people, pioneers, that are trying to breathe the biology back into our land.
So simple as well, isn't it?
Amazing, yeah.
So I also wanted to mention a little bit about the Johnson Sow Bioreactor, because again, it's another option. It has its benefits, no turning, and it doesn't smell as much. So what are your thoughts on Johnson Sow Bioreactor?
Apparently, it creates the best compost out there, but it takes a year.
It's time consuming, isn't it? Yeah.
It's quite it takes some time to build it, but the greatest thing about it is once you've built it, that's it, you just leave it. And the idea of the Johnson Sow Bioreactor is, Dr. Johnson and his wife Sue have together created, similar to the thermophitic compost heap that we built. It has a round cage. Obviously, you really need to get strong steel because the volume of this is probably like 4-5 times the size of the thermophilic one. And the idea is you don't turn it, and how you get around, because it's still an aerobic process. And the way they do that is, well, you create the cage, you sit it on a pallet or a couple of pallets, and in the holes of those pallets, you drill holes in those pallets and you stick the downpipes in each of these holes. Each of the downpipes can't be any further than 12 inches away from each other and 12 inches away from the wall of the actual cage. Then you fill it up all the way up with the same types of materials. You don't pack it down because you still want the oxygen to pass through, and you leave it there for like a day. Then you water it, it sets, and then you take out the actual pipes. So you then just cover it over, and it will just do its business in a year. But if you look it up on YouTube, it's there.
Yeah, I'll put another link there. But I mean, when we get around land, I mean, we're going to try everything, because it's like, it's just the experience of it all, isn't it? Experience it. Yeah, so what I also wanted to mention is that we are launching a crowdfunding that will enable us to bring back a more localised food network in Essex by regenerating the land. So this is a project that the Sow and Grow Revolution is currently working on. We have done a video on that explaining what we actually want to do, but we're going to go into it a little bit further right now. But please check that out as well if you haven't already. But yeah, let's discuss the project, John.
Well, I mean, Sow and Grow Revolution, it's I suppose it's kind of been the concept of what we're trying to do. And the crowdfunder is a opportunity for us to be able to, first of all, raise some really needed funds, because we're all undergoing our challenges at the moment. And secondly, to kind of give a bit of exposure just to the idea. It's not even just about us. I mean, this is just about trying to pass a message on to people about localising communities. And the way that we've decided to follow is about making amazing compost. Because we've realised, I've certainly realised over my last couple of years, is how essential growing healthy, nutritional, abundant food, and to do it in a way which, you know, you can grow amazing organic food and you don't have to go and pay loads of money for it. You can grow it yourself. But what determines how well that grows is the soil you grow in. And most of the soils, farming soils, you know, garden soils, they've all been toxified in some way. And what we need to do is we need to kind of bring back the biology. And the main ways this has been done is by tilling, by digging. I mean, I've got an allotment near where I live, and the amount of people that dig, it's utterly insane.
Yeah.
You know, that they don't actually have to dig.
It's really damaging the soil and the microorganisms.
It is. It's completely, but it's a completely wasted venture. You know, there's nothing wrong if you get on a bit of land and you want to dig it over to start with. But you only ever need to do it once.
You only go do it once, and then, yeah, absolutely.
Because these things, like the mycelium strands, the hyphate, they take decades and decades to establish themselves properly, sometimes longer. So that the idea of the compost is to breathe that biology back into the soil, to help the soil to recover, to give the soil a buffer zone. That buffer zone is so important in regards to moisture, erosion, all these different things that affect the soil, and whether it floods or there's drought, you know, things like compaction, these all lead to really degraded soil. And the best way we can do it is through composting. So this is the idea. We're using different methods to create not just compost, but we're talking about a product which is going to be supercharged. And the way we do this is by following the experts and also introducing our own view on things and our own perspective and adapting it to our part of the world. This is the important thing, because how they do it in America is going to be different to here. How Jeff Lawton does it in Australia is different to here.
Yep.
We have to find our own way, and we are fortunate enough to have the facility at the moment to be able to make this. We don't know how long that's going to last, but we've been given that gift. And also the fact that there's 3 of us to do this. We all have our own skill sets and our own passions, but we're all absolutely fascinated with this. And I'm sure you agree, George, that this isn't just about us making a business. This is about us providing a service to people
for community.
And for community, and spreading the idea that we can all do it. But it just so that we are the ones that have decided to pick up the reins and lead this particular way of doing it. And everyone has their own individual way that they can contribute towards a local community. And this is what I want to spread to people is what can you do that you can bring to the table? Because everyone can do something cool and everyone can inspire people. And that's what that is relying on people that you can build relationships with. Yeah, so the point is we just want to spread some good vibes and create something where people can be empowered to do it, and then realise that actually living in that local way is much healthier for us, and all the next generations will thank us for this, rather than getting carried away in the hysteria of CO2 is causing our planet to go to hell, when that's not true. The very fact is all we need to do is go back to nature, and then all the bad stuff will just dissipate, because we don't need to be attached to the corporate entities anymore. We can localise everything and make people's lives better.
Going back to roots, going back to the way that our ancestors did it, taking back our own power and doing it ourselves, so we don't need these big corporations. But that's the whole point. I mean, we'll eventually get our own land and we'll have a bit of a permanent basis, and we want to also create a community doing this eventually. So
that's the idea, George. This is why we're doing it, is to create that community.
Exactly. Right? And we've done a podcast on off-grid living and natural living, to give people an idea of how it works and what kind of people that you need and how it all works together. But for today, I think we're coming to the end of the podcast now, so I think we've covered a lot, John. And as I say, I'll put all the links for everyone, all the relevant links as I usually do. I just want to mention that if you comment on any of our videos, I cannot reply because YouTube doesn't let me do it. I don't know why. I've tried to find out.
Put your email up there, George.
I'm going to put my email there. You can email me directly on george.sandu1980yahoo.com, or just send me a Facebook message and I'll get back to you. But for the life of me, I can't figure it out. It's just a bit of a pain in the arse. But so we're also setting up a Sow and Grow Revolution Facebook page, so you can contact us there soon. Okay. So the crowdfunding will be going live on the 31st of October. We'll get this video up and running as soon as possible, and then we can start going on from there. So thanks for listening, everyone. We really hope that you are finding these podcasts helpful, and to give you an idea where to start, if you're not sure in being self-sufficient, if you don't know what to do, growing food, having an understanding of the soil food web, permaculture, bushcrafting, prepping, natural living off-grid. I think we're covering a wide variety of things in our podcast, and we really do hope that you find it helpful. But if you've got any questions, and if there's anything else you want us to discuss and talk about, just let us know. But I'm sure there is others out there that are way ahead of us, but we are finding our own feet with all this. So we just hope everyone's finding it beneficial at some level. So keep up the good work, everyone, and we'll catch you the next time.
Thanks, George.